Thanks for joining us. In this edition of Inside Story, it's a phenomenon that's managed to not only decimate Hong Kong's fish farms, but also put the issue of monitoring under the microscope. Later in the program, why some believe the red tide crisis is a perfect example of bad communication and cooperation. And we look at satellite technology and explain why it's not a cure-all for red tide detection. That's coming up later. Well, what actually causes red tides? It's a natural phenomenon, but what makes them deadly is a mystery for scientists. Is it Mother Nature's handiwork with the help of El Niño? Or is it man-made thanks to pollution? There are questions experts are trying to answer, but as we're about to tell you, there's another way for potentially deadly red tides to wash ashore, and the source will likely surprise you, as we explain why alien and possibly dangerous algae get literally a free ride to Hong Kong waters.
The way this one came in looks more as if it was washed in from those currents which bring in water from Sea of Japan.
The scale of the red tide is very big. We have been seeing a fish kill in just a couple of hours.
你養到啲死晒，連本帶利都冇埋，梗係心痛㗎啦。
This is the culprit, an algae called dinoflagellate. But it's this particular dinoflagellate species called Gerardinium that's caused Hong Kong's deadly blooms of red tide.
This is the first time we've seen this one causing a large red tide. The red tide that we have at the moment is made up of three major species. There are a number of other things there, but three major species. But this one accounts for about 95% of the total.
This red tide, it kills by attacking the gills of the fish, right? Thereby rendering the respiratory mechanism of the fish to fail. So the fish would die because they couldn't take in any oxygen, right? So take for instance in Lammer, for example, we have been seeing a fish kill in just a couple of hours when the algae just bloom, right, within a couple of hours, and the fish is gone by the next day.
Red tides are common here, but this time the size of the blooms and their toxic effects leave a trail of questions unanswered.
We know what they do to fish, but we're not too sure exactly still how they do it to fish, and nor do we know very much about their potential effect on human beings. So the answer to all the questions is, do they do this, do they do this, do they do this, ends up by being we're not sure, we're not sure, we're not sure. Why it's bigger this year than last year or 1980s or 1970s, we don't know yet. We find that in fact the optimal ratio between nitrogen and phosphorus for each species differs slightly.
John Hotchkiss has been studying Hong Kong's red tide problem since the late 1980s.
The last bad red tides occurred in Hong Kong. A number of them occurred in Tolo Harbour, particularly because it's such an enclosed body of water, but also even in the southern waters of Hong Kong. This one was taken near Chung Hom Kok. And as you can see, there's a very intensive red tide with this characteristic blood red colour, and also the line of foam which is washed in front of the red tide as it comes up onto the beach. So that was a characteristic red tide in 1988, and they were very intensive. In fact, the last really intensive red tides that we saw were in 1988.
After researching the phenomenon for more than a decade, he recently published his findings. Algal blooms are good for marine life, but the study shows it's when they have a certain makeup that they could mean trouble.
Like many of their plants, and so like every other plant, they need nitrogen and they need phosphorus. That's what they live on. And what I've shown by looking at not only our own work in Hong Kong, but looking at other people's work in Europe and America, Australia, New Zealand, is that if you look at the ratio between nitrogen and phosphorus in the water, then I think that's the key. It's when you get a certain relationship between those two. And that explains a lot of things, because we didn't know why they occurred in clean water sometimes in polluted waters, and sometimes you can have polluted waters and they don't occur.
And environmental groups like the Friends of the Earth want the government to take a closer look at Hong Kong's sewage treatment. They're campaigning the Environment Protection Department to test water samples daily to see if other factors should be considered.
If we considering this red tide blooming, usually the content of the phosphate in marine water is a determining factor for the red tide. And according to EPD's report, the phosphate content in marine water in Hong Kong is increasing. So is it the factor that caused the great red tide blooming in Hong Kong? It's still a question. But
Careful.
One large.
You can't argue that it is just phosphates. You can't argue that it's just nitrates, even though these are a large part of sewage contamination of the sea. That kind of pollution will encourage algal growth. But obviously that's not sufficient, because that kind of pollution is there all the time. Maybe it's to do with the wind and the ocean currents bringing in the organisms from elsewhere. We just do not know what the exact combination is, but once everything comes into place, bang, right? All the nutrients are there waiting to be used. It's just that trigger. We do not know what the trigger is.
Red tides are on the rise globally, along with new or unusual forms of algal species. Foreign algal species anchor themselves in ballast waters of ships. The water-filled stabilizers make the vessels unlikely carriers of potentially harmful alien species of algae. Hong Kong is one of the busiest ports in the world, and you get lots of ships from all over the world. And is it possible for ballast water to be infected by red tide, and then red tide is brought over to Hong Kong, and then in turn you have this radical form of algae that wipes out the fish?
Yeah, well, the movement of red tide between countries and between continents has already been demonstrated. And one of my colleagues had a student recently looking at container ships, ballast water coming into Hong Kong, and was finding dinoflagellates in that ballast water. It's a perfectly easy way of transmitting not just dinoflagellates, but all sorts of other things as well in ballast water, which is why in many places, of course, great care is taken with ballast water, so that when a large boat comes into port, it doesn't suddenly discharge all its ballast water in port, it discharges it out in the open ocean.
Several countries recently introduced controls on the discharge of ballast water to protect their marine industries. And it's in South Africa where it's illegal for ballast to land or be shipped without the permission of its port authority.
Whether that is a contributory factor in red tide, I don't think anybody has made the comment. I've certainly not heard it in that context, but it is a possibility. But certainly I've read of the need to sterilize ballast water before it's discharged or while it's in transit, so that what is discharged into the foreign location is not going to have anything viable to contaminate. It's already done. Many places have got these foreign organisms, but we need to keep this under control. It mustn't be allowed to continue, and I think it does need much stronger government action in a lot of places to prevent this sort of thing happening. The law of the sea perhaps needs to be viewed in that sense, that you are violating somebody else's system by importing foreign organisms.
While it may be premature to make any direct connection with this and Hong Kong's current red tide crisis, it's certainly a possibility, especially if the laws of natural selection can't properly take their course.
If you take one organism that is held in check by its neighbours, if you like, in one place, and you transport it to a place where it's not recognised and it's not going to be held in check, there's nobody ready to eat it, say, then that organism is capable of growing out of control. If its natural predators are not there, it will grow. There's nothing to stop it. And you see that sort of thing on land. You import the prickly pear into Australia, and all of a sudden you've got a disaster. So this has been happening and is documented, I think, now for quite a number of species. Because the water is taken on board in those remote locations and then dumped in the foreign port when they need to take on the cargo, The risk is that you are importing eggs or plankton or even the whole organism itself, if it's a larger beast sometimes. On the ship's bottoms this has happened. Never mind ballast water, actually on the ship it's being transported. And if it jumps ship in that new location, finds a foothold, then it is capable of overwhelming the local ecology.
And China's ecology is at risk too. Thought to have originated in Fujian 6 months ago, red tides have struck Shenzhen and Zhuhai. What about cross-border cooperation with China?
I think pollution is a boundless problem, and we cannot improve Hong Kong itself and say that that is okay. And pollution will no matter it's through air or through water, it will affect the whole region. So cross-border should be cross-border cooperation should be improved in identifying the pollution source and manage and reduce the pollution.
So it's a regional problem as well. Because the next question is, what happens to this red tide after it leaves Hong Kong? Where does it go next?
Welcome back to Inside Story. The handling of the red tide crisis is under the microscope as fish farmers and the public demand to know why authorities had different views on how to handle the crisis and whether fish affected by red tide was safe for consumption. In this second part of our report, we look at why some think the disaster is far from natural. They ask, could better cooperation between different government departments have made a difference in how the catastrophe was handled? And as you're about to find out, even the best satellite technology money can buy isn't a cure-all for red tide detection. For most of his life, Choi Choi Kum has depended on the seas.
我識得10幾歲嗰陣時，我都攞魚㗎啦。而家今年就60歲啦。我阿爺嗰代都喺度攞魚㗎，大概10幾年㗎啦，養魚。
But now the seas have taken their toll on his livelihood.
我都估唔到會咁厲害嗰啲紅潮嘅。我哋平時咧就係紅潮3兩日咧就會過嘅，一嚟咗3兩日會走嘅就冇事嘅。而家咧就差唔多成個月啊，仲有咁犀利，差唔多日日都有死魚。喂，張叔，擺個鏡頭嗰度咧。
The only thing Choi Choi Kum can do is to get rid of the dead fish and try to start over.
有咩打算啊？而家？ 要等睇嗰啲水口好，有錢先落雨咯，冇計㗎依家。
Out of Hong Kong's 1,500 fish farms, 2/3 have been wiped out by red tide. And it's the government fish farmers blame for their woes.
我哋都唔知，即係淨係睇嗰啲水，嗰啲魚一唔妥嘅，我哋就拉牌，佢移動處都冇通知過我哋。
Officials beg to differ. They claim the red tide took them by surprise and that they did everything possible to alert the fish farmers.
I find it difficult to believe that statement. This red tide has now persisted for over a month. We first saw it appearing in Hebe Haven in middle of March. And it, as I said, some of my students are working up in that area and they've tracked it through Hebe Haven, through Junk Bay, so they've seen it passing down that coastline. Now, it took about a month to travel down that whole coastline. Now, it didn't originate there. It came there. Where did it come from? I'm sure that somebody could have been out there and seen it coming. They can't say it suddenly appeared.
What went wrong in dealing with the problem?
Well, I won't say anything is wrong, right? Except that the red tides has come this time. The scale of the red tide, I mean the geographic area that this red tide cover is very big, and the duration that this red tide persists is also considerable enough to kill the fish.
And from the first sighting, were there already people from your department taking tests, etc., of the water?
Yes, right from day one, on the 18th of March, when the first strike of the red tide, of this red tide on the North District, right, the 3 fish culture zones. And we have taken water samples to look at the type of the algae, and also we have alert all the mariculturists in other areas to take precautionary measures.
Some believe poor communication and coordination are also causes for the red tide disaster.
Unfortunately, in terms of red tides, there certainly appears to be, and there doesn't seem to be any great sharing of information between the departments, for example. So both the Environmental Protection Department and the Agriculture and Fisheries Department produce independent reports on red tide occurrences, which don't always totally match, which is a little confusing to say the least. But also is a little concerning as a scientist, because it indicates that they aren't actually sharing and discussing that information. And then the health department doesn't seem to be terribly much involved in those sort of discussions either, because in this recent episode we've had the Agriculture and Fisheries Department saying it's perfectly safe, there are no toxins, but then the health department saying, well, there are some toxins, but they're in low quantities, so you should be careful. But again, the public is getting 2 different messages from these 2 government departments.
We have been talking with each other, and there's no inconsistency. Actually, what we've been saying is fish is fit for human consumption, and then we have been saying this, and health is saying this. So I don't think there's any inconsistency here. As far as the other part of your question about the coordination between the different departments, that is on the operation side. When this incident occurs and there's a dead fish, there's a disposal problem, and I think all the departments concerned have been doing a great job.
If cooperation is so good, why did a 2-day exercise to dispose of the dead fish become now more than a week?
Now the problem is here, because the volume of dead fish, right? We are talking a huge volume of fish, and secondly, the situation is constantly changing, because the fish is not that become dead, right, just overnight, because we are talking about different fish culture zones, and the red tide strike at different times.
What has remained stagnant, it seems, is the way red tide is monitored in Hong Kong. Fish farmers are now calling for change.
而家你世界上咁好嘅設備都冇，即係譬如咁嘅禮儀啊、測氧機啊，同埋衛星測啊嗰啲咩嗰啲紅潮嘅圖都冇。
The best monitoring system is a 2-fold system, as is used in many parts of the world, America, Europe, New Zealand, for example, where they start off on a big scale with either using satellite monitoring or monitoring by using aircraft. And so that gives you the big picture. That tells you, okay, because you can recognize it by changes in the color. So by changing the color in the water, you can say there's a big red tide coming, it's coming in this direction. That's the first warning.
But agriculture and fisheries officials believe it's technology that isn't practical for Hong Kong.
There are certain restrictions to the use of satellite pictures at the present moment. One is the geographical size of Hong Kong itself. Most of our culture zones are concentrated around the coast of Hong Kong, and Hong Kong is of quite a small size. Right? The resolution of satellite pictures have certain limits. So we are talking about looking at a small area, right, using a satellite pictures which usually cover quite a large area, right? So we got a resolution problem here. Secondly, the red tides usually come in March, right? This is the I would say the hot season for red tides. And satellite pictures, the biggest enemy for satellite pictures would be fog and cloud. And at this time of the year, a lot of the time, Hong Kong would be covered with cloud and fog.
Here you see the sardine race course. Individual ponds within the race course can be shown quite clearly.
At the Chinese university, 2 types of satellite technology are being used. One is your so-called regular satellite imagery. The other is called a land resources satellite. The former provides images with a coarse resolution, but it covers more area at more intervals. The land resources satellite, on the other hand, provides very high-resolution pictures of areas, but it takes longer to capture. The costs vary too. Setting up a satellite station can cost from $500,000 to several $1,000,000, while the land resources satellite imagery requires special software, and it can cost up to 20 to 40,000 Hong Kong dollars.
A few departments within the government has already using this kind of information. For instance, the Royal Observatory is taking data from weather satellites. The problem perhaps is how does it distribute this data to the sister departments effectively so that other departments can get use of this kind of data for their own applications.
All agree that what is clearly essential to red tide detection is getting people on the ground.
All that satellite monitoring will tell you is that there's a large red tide accumulating in the water, but it won't tell you what are the species there, how many different ones there are, whether they're toxic. So you need both things.
So if enough time is given to fish farmers to respond to red tide, would they really be able to save their fish farms, which are all located in shallow waters? Experts believe the government's fish zoning scheme is problematic.
Now again, in Hong Kong, we don't really have a mechanism that the fishermen can react with. In some countries, for example, in the United States, systems are used whereby when there are red tides, then the cages in which the fish are kept are lowered in the water, because these small algae need light, so they only occur in the surface 25-30 centimeters or so of water. And then you can blow in some oxygen, some air, aerate them well, and overcome most of the biggest problems. In countries like Japan, the fish are actually taken out of the water and put into holding tanks on land. Now, the two sides of the question are, first of all, we don't have a very good monitoring system in Hong Kong, but even if we could monitor and say to the fishermen, there's a red tide coming, what do?
If you're wondering why patience seems to be running out concerning Hong Kong's ability to deal with red tides, well, there's a good reason.
And of course, yes, that is frustrating. We worked on those red tides in those 1980s. We had a conference which we ran at the university on red tides in Hong Kong, which we invited a number of people around the world who work on red tide, people from China, all government departments, and we talked about red tides, what caused them, what could be done and so on. But, you know, the report sits on my bookshelf.
We are still open-minded, right? We will look at different options, see if there's any improvement in new technology, so we will keep an eye on it. And that is why we are working closely with the Hong Kong Observatory, because they are the expert within the government on satellite pictures. So they will be giving us advice as to what we can do and what we cannot.
The toing and froing and the disagreement between the departments and the indecisiveness of the whole thing is just typical Hong Kong.
Meanwhile, for fish farmers like Choi Choi Kum, the current debate means little, and it comes too late.
如果可以俾你揀，你仲會揀做翻漁民啊？
唔會㗎啦！而家啲魚死得咁犀利，而家都冇得做，做漁民都冇得做，攞魚又冇得攞啦，養魚都冇得養啦，點會做漁民啊？